Rebbe on Erev Yom Kippur to receive what's known as lekach. Now, lekach is literally a piece of cake, a honey cake, that traditionally the rabbi or a leader of a community will give a piece of cake before Yom Kippur to his congregation to wish them a sweet year. It's called lekach. And when the son of this ill newspaper editor, Rabbi Jacobson, came by the Rebbe for cake, the Rebbe gave him for his father as well. And he asked, how's your father feeling? And he said, my father's sick. My father's in the hospital. The Rebbe told him, I want you to go tell your father. It's a pretty heavy part of the story. When he realizes the reason of why he's found in the hospital, he'll start getting better. So the son right away went to his father, relayed the Rebbe's words. And the father, sitting ill in the hospital, realized, I have something I've got to be doing here. And up until that point, he considered himself a patient. And the doctors that came in were his healers. Then he realized, wait a minute, I'm here. I have to communicate with them. I have to share a message with them. There's a reason why I'm here. And he started, being like a Chabad rabbi in a hospital where he was sharing thoughts, asking people about their families. And he became much more of a giver than a patient that's more of a receiver in a hospital. And the day after Yom Kippur, one of the Rebbe's aides came to visit him. And he said, the Rebbe wants to know, are you doing good on your mission? And it was very inspiring at the time. And around in 2005, when this rabbi passed away, his children were sitting Shiva, the Jacobson boys. They were men already. And one of the doctors from the hospital from 1990 came and he said, I want you to know that your father, as a patient, had a deep impact on my life. And I was going through Shalom Bayit. I was going through struggles in my relationships. And your father would discuss matters with me, and it was very healing for me. And they realized how the impression that this ill rabbi sitting in a hospital, he realized, I'm here obviously to get better, but I'm also here for a reason. I have to do something. And it was just another story that came to mind about reframing and reshaping our understanding of the turbulence or times that we're in. Now, I find that to be, I was a little reluctant to share the story because I think you have to be a Rebbe to tell someone ill in a hospital that you have to do something in the hospital. There's a reason why you're there. I wouldn't tell that to someone. You have to be a Rebbe, but thank God we're all healthy. And it's good for us to just have our mindset that everywhere we are is an opportunity, and there's a reason, a purpose of why we're there. And there's something positive that needs my attention. There's a spark of holiness that needs my focus. And if you look at every state of turbulence and every upheaval of my life as something that is an opportunity for me to grow, it's an incredible journey to be on. So that's just a little bit more from last week. If anyone has any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear. I find it to be a little heavy of a story, and I hope it wasn't too heavy. Okay.
Rabbi, we're Jewish. It can't be too heavy.
Well said.
That's fine. I find the story very uplifting, not heavy at all.
Okay, good.
Very refreshing.
I just feel, if someone's in the hospital and they would hear that, maybe if it's coming from the Rebbe, it's so empowering to realize I have to be doing something. But putting myself in that place. Oh, I hear an echo again. Hold on one second. Trying to see. Hold on. Does anyone hear an echo?
No.
No. Okay. All right. So yeah. Okay. Good. I'm happy to hear that, Barbara. Margie, you wanted to say something? I'm sorry. Hold on. Oh, hold on. Margie, unmute yourself. Let's try that again.
No, I'm unmuted.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Sort of like wherever I am, as I'm, usually looking inward and not outward around in my surroundings, that what I wrote down, because this class makes me want to take notes, is that wherever I am, to look around me, and is there something to offer? The absolute value, though so hard to do, of staying in the moment.
Awesome.
And observing what's around. Yeah.
And I
Thank you.
think a patient in a hospital, you kind of put yourself in a certain role, like I'm here to be cared for. But you don't have to be in that role. You can be equal, or you can be you, or you can be a healer, or that's what I like about it.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Ava agrees with that as well. Thumbs up. Thank you, Isabel.
I also think when we are impacted and we feel a negative effect of something, an illness or life or stress, that the ability to get on top of that and not feel so much like things are coming at us, and that we can actually push things out and cause things, as actually part of the healing process. So selfishly, even helping someone out or getting out of our head, or help me, I'm failing. It doesn't mean we don't need help, and it doesn't mean we're not sometimes failing, because we are. But if it's an interesting story. I would never have had that point of view. So I appreciate it, because it's a way, a little seed of even healing yourself.
Beautiful. Awesome. Okay, so now I just wanted to start off the class with that thought. I'm going to actually, if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to mute everyone. You could unmute yourself at any point to ask or to talk. I'm worried if there's an echo. I don't think there's an echo now. So it's coming from one screen, but okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you, Howard, for the thumbs up. Okay, so tonight's class is more about developing a good eye, because I've been having conversations with people as a follow-up from last week's class. And even just, I talk to people quite often. I like talking. It's why I became a rabbi. Even just today, I was speaking with someone who just celebrated a birthday in the community. And for their birthday, they have a young family. They planned on taking a trip. And they have 3 children. I think they were going to go to Hawaii, but obviously that's not happening. So instead, they went camping. They rented an RV. They ended up buying the RV, but originally the plan was to rent an RV, and they went camping. And so they ended up buying the RV, and they're going to go camping across California. That's their plan. And he was like, it's like, I wanted to go to Hawaii. We went camping. And I said, that's so amazing. You would never have gone camping with 3 little kids if not for the time we're in. It's like, and he realizes, like, you're right, that these are memories that could only be built because we're in the time we're in, and because we're in an RV. And it was just a beautiful perspective to see a good eye. You could have the same story, the same narrative, the same words, but just changing the perspective, it can make all the difference. To quote Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, Chapter 2 of Ethics of the Fathers. Several in the class this evening joined us for our Pirkei Avot class in May. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was a teacher of giants of students, the greatest students. And he gave them a project, and he said these words, Say ulamad, go and study. I want you to research, come back to me. What is an important trait to have? One of his great students, a tower of a student, Rabbi Elazar ben Horkenes, came back and says, I've traveled, and I see the most important trait is to have, in Hebrew the words are, ayin tov, which means a good eye. To have a good perspective within everything. To have an eye that sees the good. The same view, the same vision, but with a different view. Because when our eyes which is our lens of life, sees good, it will likely be a good story. When what we see depends on what we look for. And depending on what we look for, that's what we're going to see in something. Ayin tov, to have a good eye. What we're looking for is what we're going to see. So to illustrate this with a story from the Rebbe, it's a powerful story based on a 5-word quote of the Talmud. Howard, you could correct me on the exact source. Howard went through the Talmud. He just celebrated going through the whole Talmud a couple months ago. In the 70s, there were other Hasidic communities, Hasidim from other communities, that would come and confide in the Rebbe or get the Rebbe's blessing, or if they had a passage of Talmud or something, the Torah passage that they had a question on, a lot of times they would come and address it to the Rebbe. So this one particular Chassid, who was not Chabad, came and had a private audience with the Rebbe. And when they were done about their personal matter, the Rebbe asked him, tell me something you've learned from your Rebbe in another section of Brooklyn. Tell me a new thought. And he says that they were studying a tractate, Chagiga, which is one of the tractates of the Talmud. And towards the end of the tractate, it says these words, Afilu Poishe Yisrael Mileim Mitzvot Kerimon, which means, the Talmud says, even the sinners of Israel fill mitzvahs like the seeds fill a pomegranate. Just like a pomegranate has many seeds, it's one of the reasons why we, on Rosh Hashanah evening, by dinner, we eat a pomegranate to fill our year with mitzvahs. So the Talmud says, even sinners of Israel fulfill mitzvahs like seeds fill a pomegranate. So the question he had, this chassid coming to the Rebbe in the 70s, is how could it be that the Talmud is calling them filling mitzvahs like a pomegranate? They're sinners of Israel. How could they be filling mitzvahs like a pomegranate? He was stuck. He couldn't understand it. The Rebbe closed his eyes, nodded, and was silent for around 30 seconds. And the Rebbe had tears in his eyes. And he responded that I studied that same passage of the Talmud. And I've had a similar question on that same passage. But my question was the opposite. If the Talmud is calling them fulfilling mitzvahs like a seed in a pomegranate, how could they be called sinners of Israel? It's the same passage. But the perspective, the view, where is your eye focusing on? Is it focusing on the fact that they're sinners, that they're not doing the right thing? Is it focusing on the fact that they're filling mitzvahs? So the Rebbe was saying, if they're filling mitzvahs, how could the Talmud call them sinners? But this other chassid's question was, how could they be filling mitzvahs if they're sinners? It's just an interesting perspective to get a view on, to get a glimpse into how the Rebbe's eye, the Rebbe's perspective, the Rebbe's vision on the same story, but you could have a whole new view, an ayin tov. You could look at something, the same narrative, with a good eye, or the opposite. They say Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, who was a great Hasidic master during the times of the first Chabad Rebbe in the late 1700s. He died in 1804, I think maybe 1805. He was the rabbi of a city of Berditchev. And there's beautiful stories that show his perspective of love and kindness. One of them is, I was discussing with Adina tonight's class, and she put these perspectives in of these stories of Reb Levi Yitzchak, how there was once a studious guy who was, he frequented the synagogue for services and he would stay after to pray, but by trade he was a wagon driver. And one day he was in the middle of praying, but it was a snowy, muddy day outside in Russia. And he remembered that he left his wagon in a place that is more prone to get mud and for his wheels to get stuck in the wagon. So he ran outside during prayers with his talis, his prayer shawl, and his tefillin on. And it was too late. His wagon was already stuck. So before the big storm hits, he's trying to push his wagon out. And here's a scene of a chassid fully dressed in worship, in prayer. And he's there getting muddy, and he has mud on his face and all over. And people were watching this and saying, what a chutzpah. This guy, he's doing this. It was just so off. And they were disgusted. And the Reb Levi Yitzchak came and he said, what are you guys watching? He said, look at this. How could it be? And Reb Levi Yitzchak took a look and he said, wow, even when he's busy with his wagon, he's still praying. Like their perspective was, he's praying, but he's thinking about his wagon. His perspective was, even when he's with his wagon, he's in the middle of prayer. The same story, just a beautiful perspective. The same Levi Yitzchak, there was, I've shared the story, I think pretty recently. There was a congregant of his in Berditchev who was not religious, was pretty modern, and it was Yom Kippur, and he was outside maybe during the break smoking a cigarette. Now in the olden days, smoking wasn't unhealthy. They didn't know all that, but Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur, and you don't smoke on Yom Kippur. We don't make a flame on Yom Kippur. So he goes over to this congregant and he says, young man, do you know that today is Yom Kippur? And the guy says, yeah. He says, do you know that you're smoking? And he says, yeah. He takes a puff of his cigarette. So Reb Levi Yitzchak says, do you know that one should not be smoking on Yom Kippur? And he says, yeah, I know that. Reb Levi Yitzchak turns to God, faces heaven, and he says, Father in heaven, I gave him every opportunity in the book to lie, and he wouldn't take it. He's a man of truth. It's like a beautiful narrative or a good eye to see a story. So if it's okay with everyone, I just want to share my screen. And I just wanted to show you, some of you have seen this before, but I thought it would be a good thing just to bring up. What I want to show you is, and you'll tell me if you could see it in a moment. I want to ask you, you could either chat it or you could tell me what you think after a few moments. It's a picture where you could either see, you could see one of two things. And I would love to see how you would see it. The same picture. Hold on, I did not share it. Oh, I did, okay. My question to you is, do you see an old lady or a young lady? You could chat it in, maybe before everyone, let me know what you think.
Young lady.
Oh, it took me a while to see the old lady. I only saw a pretty young girl.
Fred and I see both. But he
Oh,
had
wow.
a show. But I saw the young one. He immediately saw the old one. So he showed me, and it took me a minute, even after he told me where it was.
Beautiful. Awesome. I'm getting some private, some public responses. Awesome. So I'm just going to go through what some of the people are saying. Old, young girl, young woman, young lady, young. I've always seen the old lady first. Awesome. I see the old, but first I see the young lady. Young. Okay, awesome. Great answers. So it's back to that story and seeing this picture. You could have an identical text of the Talmud or an identical picture and still see two ways of how to see that passage of the Talmud. So let's just go back to that Talmud and that story of the Rebbe with that chassid in the private audience. It's not just, the story is not just about the spiritual state of that sinner of Israel. Are we seeing him with the capacity, the potential of fulfilling mitzvahs, or we're seeing him as a sinner? But it's also just in the discussion of it, in the authors of that Talmud. How did they write it? How do we read the story of how they wrote, how they viewed that passage? And it's an incredible, what I want to try to come up with during this evening and together is to be able to focus on that ayin tov, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was teaching his students about. To focus your attention, you could either do it on the negative or on the positive aspects, and to learn that not only that the Rebbe did it, but to see in ourselves that power, that innately we have that opportunity to see everything, both positive or negative. Which one are you choosing to see? Which one is your bias in seeing? Now, some of it comes naturally, like to see the young lady first or whatever, but some of it requires effort to be able to have that positive bias and be able to see the world, not just to realize it's not just a feel-good rabbi telling you, look at the good. It's really making that your bias. Like we said last week, we all have a bias. It's there, but it's our choice if we're choosing that bias to be a positive one or the reverse. Any thoughts before we continue? Anyone have a question?
I had a question because Rabbi, you've said it takes effort.
Yeah.
There's a bias. It takes work. Is it educational? Is it intuition? Is it something that you can force your thoughts into? Because sometimes it seems correct to see the negative. I'm not defending it, but it just feels like I'd be an idiot to see the positive in this, although I've been able to see the positive and negative things. I mean, what happens in your mind to make that switch? What's that quality? Where does that come from?
Brilliant. And I think the eyes are just processing what your mind is thinking, meaning what you choose in your mind to see, your eyes will allow you to see. And I think it's really a thought process in the mind. It's a daily process. I go through it all the time, is thinking, how do I want to, what am I looking for? What am I thinking to allow myself to see?
So it's a personal perception. Is it practice?
Yes, certainly practice. And actually, if it's okay with everyone, I just want to share my screen one more time. And then Margie, I want to hear your thoughts. Let me just go back to this picture. I'm just going to, tell me if you see another picture coming up. There we go. Everyone see the second picture come up? So Honi, or Humans of New York, Adina showed me this a couple years ago. It's a person who I think lost a job, and he decided to go around with his camera in New York and would just snap, I think, random pictures, and he would ask them what they're thinking or what they're doing. So here's from June 6, 2014, so over 6 years ago. And he asked these two sitting in a park in New York, what do you do? And they said, we're eye doctors. So what's something about the eye that most people don't realize? The photographer, Honi, asked them, and they said, the eye doesn't see, the brain sees. The eye just transmits. So what we see isn't only determined by what comes through the eyes. What we see is affected by our memories, our feelings, and by what we've seen before. That's a bias. Now it's up to us to allow our mind to determine what's going to come through our eyes. And I think that's a practice, Jolie, as you're saying, to allow that in and to see the good, that ayin tov. I just want to explain this a little more, but Margie, I would love to hear your question, and then we'll focus on that a little more. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking of what you had said last week, that the Rebbe worked on himself to see the positive, that it wasn't natural. And I think that's great, because a lot of people, for whatever our backgrounds are, thinking positive is not the natural state of being, and that it's as I wrote down, it is a conscious and concerted effort to focus on the positivity. It's more of a choice, not my given personality. So, which is great, because that means it's up to me.
So Menachem, Miss Tessa,
Yeah.
and sometimes I think it's easier to see the negative. I think I try not to do that, but for some people, it's just to see the negative. It's just easier than to stretch a little bit and to look to see the good.
So Tessa, would you think it's more natural to see the negative, or it's just easier?
Easier.
But not necessarily natural.
No. I think if we all realize that, we each have a spark of God in us, and that we're made in God's image, it would be a lot easier to always look at somebody and to always see the good in them on a positive. You know, when teaching school, it's very easy to look at a child and just see the good in them. That was the best thing, you know. And they said, "Oh, well, he's sometimes a v'lachai." I go, "Yes, if I see kid, it's good, it's fun. It's more fun to be with a kid who makes you stretch a little bit."
Yeah.
And maybe it's better to be with people like that too sometimes. So we'll see.
It's actually interesting that in that same quote from the Mishnah where it says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai has a student, one of them says, Ayin Tov, which is what I'm focusing on tonight, to have that good eye. The other one actually says, to have a good neighbor is an important place to be, is what defines you, is the place you are, because you feed off your community, you feed off your friends, you define yourself. And I think they go together, maybe, like you're saying, is to be in that good surrounding and around those students. That's an interesting thing to have. It allows you more capability. Thank you.
I think it's easy to see the negative because, well, first of all, our history of having to defend ourselves so often.
Yeah.
And then our genetic and evolutionary history also, that if you don't look out for danger, you're gonna get wiped out.
Right. And yeah, that's Adrian. Like we discussed last week, it's like a defense mechanism for survival. Your mind focuses on anything negative, and
Right.
it learns to stay away from it, and that stays in your mind a lot more than the positive that you experience, you enjoy, and you move on. But
Well,
to allow yourself.
you tell a toddler no.
Say again.
Think of how often you tell a toddler not to do something, not to put something in his mouth, not to cross the street without looking. I mean, all those things are negatives.
You know, where did I just read the story of a child? Tell me if I shared this, of a child who, he was a rambunctious, he was a fully spirited child. And he was, like you're saying, Adrian, his mother would tell him no a lot. And his mother would rebuke him. At the end of the day, your teacher called me and said so-and-so. And one night, he had a pretty good day. And he was going to sleep. And his mother told him good night. Nothing to rebuke him. She didn't get a call that day. And she closed the light, kissed him good night, and left. And she hears him sobbing under his pillow. And she goes back. And the boy asks, she asks, why are you crying? And he says, didn't I have a good day today? Don't I deserve positive feedback of my day? Like, we're so quick, like you're saying, to say no. We're so quick to rebuke. We're so quick to linger on the negative. It's hard sometimes to focus and realize the positive that's happening in our life, the positive that we could go camping now, or whatever it is. Barbara, you shared some beautiful positives of your home and the place you're in, and to see, and not only to convince yourself and to be naive, and it's allowing yourself that capacity to be focused on the positive and to strengthen yourself through it. It's I just took some notes on this based on this Honi. Is what they were saying is we're eye doctors, and it's really just transmitting from our mind. It's what we see is directly affected by our default lens of how we're thinking, or our bias. It could be for better or worse, but it's of paramount importance that we develop a capacity. And like Jolie is saying, that it's something to work on, to see God in our life and to see the good in all that is happening around us. And in essence, this is the positive bias, and like from last week, is reframing our shape of experiences, and this week seeing the good eye in what's happening. It's a foundational premise to this positive outlook. That works. Okay. So yeah, and again, Jolie, this is actually addressing my point. I just took continued notes over here. I want to address another story. Every human being possesses capacity for a vision to see positive. It's for redemptive, to see always the good. But achieving it and especially maintaining it. You could have it for a day, but it gets hard. Like Tessa's saying, it's easier to just see the negative and stay away from that and move on. But maintaining a positive bias requires effort, work, and it's amazing. So how, and sorry, Margie, did you have another question? I just see your hand up. I don't know. No, okay. I have another great story, and again, I'll share, last week, I'll share after the class. One second, sorry, everyone. Okay. I'll share some of the sources. If you didn't get it last week, an email with some sources, let me know. And if I may have skipped one or two people, I apologize for that. The following story, it's about a photographer named Levi, which is my son's name, Levi Freiden. And he was a photographer by the Rebbe for decades. And you'll see in the story, the Rebbe looks past outer appearances or expressions of negativity. And the Rebbe is going to find with the spiritual integrity and positive potential hiding within. Meaning, even in someone, it's easier to have a positive bias in someone who you don't have any beef with, but someone who's alarming you, someone who's in your face, and it's much easier, like Tessa's saying, to just throw it out and move on and have a negative judgment and say, I don't want that. To see something positive, even in someone who's kind of not neutral, but someone who's more as an opposition, and yet to find a positive quality is amazing. Now, the Rebbe was famous for this, and for those that have read this book called Positive Bias, in one of the chapters, the Rebbe, I can tell you what chapter, you can see it in the index, the Rebbe takes Korach, who was a figure in the Torah, of someone who was, he started a revolution against Moshe and against Aaron, the Kohen Gadol. And the Rebbe in a talk finds such a positive part of Korach, to the point where the whole Torah portion, an entire section of the Torah, is actually named Korach because he has a very positive quality that we need to emulate. Someone who, the way the Torah continues, he was punished. There was an earthquake and he was swallowed up. He was the source of such evil, this Korach. And yet the Rebbe says there's something we can learn from him. There's a positive part to it, and we have to focus on that. So we'll see this from the story of Levi Yitzchak Freiden, who was a photographer by the Rebbe for decades. And in the 70s, after around 20 years of taking pictures in the svivah, in the atmosphere, and the spiritual ambiance of 770, the Chabad headquarters, the solemnness, the elated moments of 770, he was from Israel. So he once did an exhibit called 770, and he had a bunch of pictures, a gallery of pictures of what 770 looks like. And in the 70s, there were a lot of people who haven't been to 770, so it was very eye-opening. It was beautiful. There was a guest book where people would write, thank you and sign their name. And there was beautiful reviews that people were writing. One of them was a journalist who also signed the guest book, but this was in the Bar Ilan University, but he didn't have a positive review. His words were, with all due respect to the superb photography, the subject, meaning 770, this Hasidic synagogue that you have chosen, is extremely clerical and takes us back to the primitive darkness of the Middle Ages. That was one review in a book of the guest book of many people that came and signed it. So Levi Freiden was back in 770, and he told the Rebbe about this gallery, about this exhibit, and he presented the Rebbe with the guest book. And the Rebbe flipped through the guest book, read this comment in there from this journalist who didn't have the most flattering review. And the Rebbe noticed it, and he said these words, "Please compliment the journalist on his strength of character." And the Rebbe explained, it takes fortitude to differ from all other of the other responses and to have his view. Meaning the easier thing is everyone saying it's great, it must have been great. And here's a journalist who has his opinion and he's sticking to it. And the Rebbe concluded to Levi Freiden, to the photographer, and said, but tell him also that not everything in the Middle Ages was dark. And the Rebbe found a way to take up, just reading the story, to positively spin the negative journalist or the negative reporter, as well as to take a positive spin on the Middle Ages. So in many respects, the Middle Ages was not that good for the Jewish people, not very pleasant, but not all parts of it was dark. And I really enjoy this story. And just one more on this point of the Rebbe's ability to see the best possible light and frame that and view it that way with an ayin tov, with that good eye. There was an underhanded political maneuver. If I'm not mistaken, it's in the book, it doesn't say the date, but the Rebbe had founded, I'm assuming it was in the 80s, there was, the Rebbe founded an organization to counter attempts by Christian missionaries to recruit Jews. So a lot of them are known as Jews for Jesus, J for J, and they go around communities and they try to recruit Jews. They're missionaries. So to counter it, the Rebbe founded an organization to address this. One of the big proponents of this was Rabbi Shachat from Toronto, Emmanuel Shachat. But the Rebbe, even though the Rebbe founded it, the Rebbe remained anonymous in order to attract support from the broader Jewish world, in case if it said the name Chabad on there would be some naysayers and say we're not part of it. So the Rebbe didn't want his name on it. But the Rebbe's name became known, and one of the organization's leaders, who was antagonistic to Chabad, when he saw that the Rebbe is behind this, he removed himself from the organization and he started a similar organization. And he solicited a lot of the donors that were funding the original organization. He took a lot of the donors with him, and it was a patch and punim. It was so disrespectful. Now he has another organization to combat missionaries, because the first organization the Rebbe was part of. So one of the organization's managers, when he found out, he wasn't a Chabadnik, but when he found out that this other rabbi left the organization and started his own, he was so dismayed by it. And he went to the Rebbe to question it. Like, how could a person do such a thing? How could this rabbi put politics before principles? And the Rebbe responded by citing a very interesting Talmudic quote. Howard, tell me if you're familiar with this quote. It's from Sanhedrin, where in Jewish, if any of you are familiar, Jewish holidays fall out on different dates of the Gregorian calendar. Hanukkah sometimes from November. It could also be on January 1st. Because every 3 years we have what's known as a leap year, which is not just an extra day of February. A Jewish leap year is an entire month. But who would decide in temple times who was the court to decide the month? The law was that the king of Israel would not be allowed to be on the committee, on the court, to decide if this year should be a leap year or not. Nor the Kohen Gadol, one of the holiest people of the Jewish people, he would not be allowed to rule if this year should be a leap year. Why? Because they have a bias. What's their bias? The king, he has to pay his troops. He pays them on an annual salary, which means for the year, you get this amount. If it's a leap year, which means it's a 13-month year instead of a 12-month year, he gets away with an extra month of the year that he doesn't have to pay. Like, he's paying them for the year, but he's still getting taxes from people on a monthly basis. But the payments to the troops and to officials is on an annual basis. So he profits an extra month. So in his mind, he's biased that he wants a leap year. So he can't be on the committee. The Kohen Gadol would be in the temple, of course, for Yom Kippur. And a lot of it was outdoors. There was a mikvah. And the mikvah, but this is before heating and spa-like mikvahs, he would have to immerse in the mikvah 5 times on Yom Kippur. Preferably, he'd rather Yom Kippur be in September than in late October. So he also can't be on the committee because he wouldn't want the leap year, which would delay Yom Kippur by a month. So the Rebbe explains that just like the king and the Kohen Gadol can't be on a committee because they have a bias, it's human nature. That we're all prone to subconscious calculation of self-interest, whether we know it or not. Even a king has a self-interest. Even a Kohen Gadol has a self-interest. So the Rebbe reminded the manager, the person in charge of the original organization, that the rabbi that he was judging came from a community in Europe that was wiped out in the war. And he was trying to establish now a yeshiva in New York, which depended on certain donors to see its success. So the Rebbe said, this is all he has. He lost his community in Europe. He came here and he founded a yeshiva. The Rebbe tells the person complaining, can you blame that rabbi for wanting to ensure the success of his yeshiva and his important work and his legacy? It's a story that it has some political background to it, but here's a rabbinic leader who was engaging in petty politics that he pulled out of such a worthy organization because he hears that there's another rabbi he doesn't like that's sitting that's behind it. Really, a rabbi should be a person of integrity, thinking about the Jewish community, thinking about what the people need most. But here, the Rebbe put a positive spin on this rabbi's tactics, that he's trying to protect his community and trying to protect his yeshiva, but also acknowledge what the rabbi is doing, saying he's like the Kohen Gadol. They all have a bias. He's equating this rabbi who's playing petty politics with some of the holiest people of the Jewish world, the king, the Kohen Gadol. It's an incredible positive that the Rebbe is able to have on a person who, the way we would look at him, was being petty and being childish. And this was something that impacted the Rebbe. It wasn't a neutral person. This was the Rebbe's organization that was there to fight missionaries and to establish education for the Jewish people. It would be so easy to just throw this person in a negative light. The Rebbe managed to find a positive and a redemptive quality, or a positive way to view those who are trying to undermine his holy work. Okay, one final point to ponder, and then I would love to hear your thoughts. Time and time again, like over and over again, the Rebbe taught by way of example and through his teachings and through his work, that not only do what we look for affect the way we see things, from our mind seeing it through our eyes, but also what we look for in others affect those others are affected by the way we look at them. They look at themselves differently of how we look at them. If we change the way we look at people, the people you look at change. Let me say that again. If we change the way we look at people, the people we look at change. Around a month and a half ago, we shared a video. Again, we made this video with other Chabad communities. We called it NorCal Potential. And it was a bunch of Chabad communities that came together for an hour of stories of impact from the Rebbe. And he was a young boy at the time. He had a nice trimmed white beard now. And his name is Shalom Bear. His last name is Baer. He's known as Shelley. His first name, he was known as Shelley. And he recounts that he was a yeshiva boy in Torah Vadas. in Bellman Avenue in Brooklyn. And he says that he was shortly before his 10th birthday. And his mother, she was beside herself. The boy was becoming rebellious. He would be kicked out of school, kicked out of his class. The teachers didn't know what to do with him anymore. And the mother felt like, what's happening to my child? He wasn't interested in his Judaism anymore. He not only questioned, he gave up. He was rebellious. He was chutzpahdik, is the word in yeshiva terms that it's called. And his mother took him to see the Rebbe. It was him, his younger sister, and their mother. She was a single mom, and they came in front of the Rebbe. And she tells the Rebbe, Rebbe, what do I do? All the Rebbes, all the teachers are complaining that Shali's not listening in school anymore, and he doesn't do his homework. The program, he's eating stuff in the middle of class, and he's not listening anymore. So she was crying, asking the Rebbe, what do I do with him? And here's this kid who couldn't care less. So the Rebbe tells him, Kuma herzu. The Rebbe tells him, come closer, come here. And he comes closer, and he says later, he says, I was ready to fight. I was ready to go. And usually the Rebbe would ask a question. The Rebbe says, come here, what do you want? So the Rebbe, instead of the Rebbe starting, the little kid, a 9-year-old, is telling the Rebbe, are you the Rebbe? And the Rebbe smiles and says yes. And then the Rebbe asks him, are you a good boy? And he says, no. Do you like school? No. And he was ready for this. This was his mojo. This is what he did. Do you listen to your mother? No. A big smile comes on the Rebbe's face, turns to the mother and says 2 words, emes. Tells his mother, I see truth in him. He has emes. It's a beautiful word in Hebrew or Yiddish. I see truth. And Shali concludes, and they video it. I'll share it with everyone after. That was the moment that I found myself, and it put me back on the track of Yiddishkeit. Someone who saw in me beyond my outside exterior facade that I've been putting on to try to get attention. He saw beneath it. He saw something, an innocent boy, an emesse boy. And he was a rebellious child, looking for confrontations. All of the sudden, all of that resistance melted away in that moment. And he encountered someone that saw him his tmimus, which is his innocence. Instead of his insolence, he saw innocence. He saw his childish purity and genuinity. He saw his true quality, his inner truth. And the same is for us. When we are lovingly shown our essential goodness and shown our inner truth by someone else, we begin seeing that ourselves. The way we see someone changes the way they will see themselves too. And then we can start acting on it. But us having a positive ayin tova, that good eye for someone, it actually benefits us, but it benefits them to see them being looked at in that way. It changes them also. That little story of a 9-year-old boy, it put him on a path because finally someone saw him and it changed him. So to try to put this into practice, let's think of times in our life or someone in your life whom you're having a hard time with. Some of us have a few people. Some of us maybe can't think of anyone. Some of us could come up with a pretty extensive list. But what are they doing that disturbs you, that's bothering you? And try to think, what's the possible reason of why they're acting that way, why they're doing what they're doing. Is there a possibility for you to see past that facade, past that image that they're putting up, past that arrogance that they have or that self-absorption that they're always into, and try to see past it, see them with empathy, see their inner qualities, see a wholesome essence of who they are beyond that facade, beyond that arrogance. And you'll see that they're beyond that, they're in need of nurture. They're actually in need of someone to give them a positive word. Because if you change the way you look at people, the people you look at change. And I'll just conclude with one more story. There's in the mid 60s, 1964, there was a Jewish boy from Pittsburgh. He was in the 7th grade. His name was Yael, was his Hebrew name, but he went by Yael Butler. And his father was active in the Jewish community of Pittsburgh. And for those that have been to the Squirrel Hill community of Pittsburgh, it's a pretty, I don't know if it's a small community, but they're tight-knit, meaning all the different communities collaborate. I've been there a few times and I have friends from there. It seems like a community of togetherness. And this young boy, his father was active in the larger Jewish community. And their family developed a relationship with a Chabad rabbi whose name was Rabbi Yossi Spielman. And this 7th grader, who was not a Chabadnik, he was an individualist and a creative thinker. And in 7th grade, he decided for his school, he's starting a student body. He's starting a newsletter, but he wanted it to start with a bang. He wanted it to be a big buzz in the community. Not only for his school, he wanted it to be more popular. He wanted it to go more for the broader community. So he became the editor of a school newspaper, and he was writing together the first newsletter. So another figure in the Jewish community was a Chabadnik, a Lubavitcher, and he wore an army hat and an army jacket. Now, together with his army hat and jacket, and together with his beard, he got a nickname of Castro. That was his nickname in the Pittsburgh community. And it's an interesting nickname to be given. I guess Fidel Castro's totalitarian and anti-American policies were maybe not as widely known in the early 60s. But Yael decided for his newsletter, he's coming up with a story, and he's going to expand on this caricature of Castro and have an association between this rabbi from the Pittsburgh community that was nicknamed Castro and Fidel Castro of Cuba. And he wrote a fictional account about an invasion in Cuba in which Castro's troops were in danger of being wiped out. So Castro, in desperation, Castro called on his brothers in 770, and they contacted the Rebbe. And the Rebbe says, we have to go to the Brooklyn Navy Yard and get submarines to support Castro in Cuba. That was his fictional newsletter, thinking he's going to cause a buzz and people are going to love his newsletter. So it definitely brought attraction and a buzz, but not in a positive light. People were very unimpressed with the 7th grader coming up with this fictional account. And they demanded he puts in, it was his first and his last newsletter that he wrote for this school. But they demanded that he apologize to this Castro, in the nickname Castro in Pittsburgh, and to the broader Jewish community. And he went to Rabbi Spielman, who was a Chabad rabbi that he was close with. And instead of reprimanding him, Rabbi Spielman said, how about we go meet the Rebbe in New York? And the 7th grader agreed. He thought it was a great opportunity. So he went to Brooklyn. Rabbi Spielman arranged a private audience. And on a Sunday evening, Rabbi Spielman and the 7th grader, Yael Butler, meet the Rebbe. And Yael Butler sits down, and he sees Rabbi Spielman backing out of the room. He thought he was going to be together with the rabbi. Now he finds himself alone with the Rebbe. And he's pretty nervous. And the Rebbe starts telling him beautiful things, that I know your family and the work that your father does in the community. I hear such nice things about you. And he started to get more at ease. And up until that point, he says he was focused on the Rebbe's eyes. And it was so warm and welcoming. But then he saw on the Rebbe's desk the newsletter. And again, he started getting very nervous. Oh my gosh, the Rebbe read this newsletter. he felt he wanted to sink in his seat, he says. The Rebbe made no mention of the article. And the Rebbe spoke of a person's obligations to see talents that one has as a trust, meaning that Hashem is trusting me with the talents I'm given to make good on them and to benefit others. In particular, the Rebbe emphasized, a writer should use his abilities to promote Jewish unity and love for one another. And Yale says later, he became a rabbi, and he became very well known, and he writes that he began to relax, and his feelings of fear turned into feelings of empowerment. He felt very excited with meeting the Rebbe, and instead of reproaching Yale for disrespecting with the story, the Rebbe recognized his potential and encouraged him to develop it, and gave him a positive and productive focus for the future. And 20 years later, in 1982, he became a rabbi of B'nai B'rith and a publisher of the newsletter called the B'nai B'rith Messenger. And every week in this newsletter, he would dedicate a section of it with a Torah thought from the Rebbe. And he says something amazing. He says he was in the 80s, he was going through the subscribers. And on his own, when he started this newsletter, he put the Rebbe as a subscriber, meaning he gave the Rebbe newsletters. But when he was going through the list of all the subscribers, he saw that the Rebbe actually subscribed to it and sent in a check to be the recipient of these newsletters on his own accord, and he paid for it. And the Rebbe even remarked years later to someone else that reported it back to Yale Butler that already from his childhood, he was a unique and skilled writer. It's an incredible story of the Rebbe taking a little kid that you want to reprimand and rebuke and punish. And the Rebbe saying you have a unique talent of skills that have to be used to benefit others. And you have to find your talents and use them. And that positivity bias that the Rebbe had allowed this young kid to see through the veneer. The Rebbe was able to see through the veneer of his childishness and see a boundless potential of spiritual accomplishment that can happen through this young child. So to end the class, my final thoughts is this Ayin Tov that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai teaches us from his student Rabbi Elazar ben Horkenes, to see others with a positive light, both helps us, and it takes effort to see, but also when we see others in that positive light, in an incredible way, like that story of Shali Bear, that little kid that the Rebbe says, Emes. And with this Yale Butler, you see them in that positive light, it helps them see themselves that way also. And it helps them tear away any facade and see their true power that they can have. And so to conclude, it's like part of reframing and reshaping not only the time we're in, but the people we come in contact with, that we could easily just write off and say with a negative bias, that person is obnoxious or whatever, is try to get beyond the reason of their arrogance and see with empathy where they're coming from. And is there a positive approach that we could have, whether it's that passage of the Talmud of sinners of Israel, and the Rebbe focused on the idea that they're filling mitzvahs with seeds of a pomegranate, but to see that powerful and that positive thing, and like I showed you before in the picture, we could see everything with those two lens, and it's our choice to put on that lens of a positive view. Sometimes it's harder, like we were saying before, like Jolie and Tessa were saying, it'll take work. And sometimes it's easier to look from the other perspective, but it could be an amazing power to have that positive view and outlook. Anyone have a story that they've encountered that could bring in this point? Like I could come up with, besides for Rebbe stories, just in my own life, or moments or people that you could think one way and you could see them talking in synagogue and you could right away want to tell them to shush, and it could be it could be appropriate, but at the same time maybe they have no friends, and maybe this is the one place where they could finally have a conversation. Seeing everything with a positive view could reframe so much and reshape so much, both in our life, but also in the life of that person, that we're thinking the positive or the negative. Any thoughts? Anyone want to unmute or I see him missing. Yes, Ava.
So I notice, as I personally have been trying to be more positive in my daily life, that I spot in other people and people close to me that are not necessarily negative people. They generally are positive people. But I spot sometimes when they're kind of taking the easy route and being negative over something instead of seeing the positive in it. And it becomes kind of upsetting and very frustrating to me.
Yeah.
And it's like I see it easier now when people do that. So I find myself trying to find the right thing to say to kind of turn it around if I can. Yeah, but that's just something I've been more aware of lately.
Awesome. And read that reframing. Beautiful. Thank you. I'll also read some comments that I've missed. I'm sorry. It reminds me of a camera. The optical information is the same, but the image changes according to whether you have a telephoto, wide angle, or a macro lens. Very awesome. It's beautiful. Someone else wrote to me privately, I know how to respond to people who see life more on the negative and try to point out the negative when you are being positive. What to do. So maybe we could bring that up to the class. Someone wrote to me privately. I'll just read it again. It's very important to address how to respond to people who see life more on the negative and try to point out the negative when you are being positive. What to do. So it'll take work on you. I would love to hear what other people have to say to that, like how to apply that, how to communicate that. I think in every encounter, in every conversation, in any incident you're in, there could be a positive view to it and a negative. The more you convince, the more you frame yourself in thinking that positive, the more it'll just be natural for you to communicate that with others. And the more it'll be hopeful that they will start seeing things in that way also.
Rabbi,
What I find, Rabbi, is that when people disagree with me, if I disagree with them, it ends up being a tug of war. So when I'm thinking straight, when somebody contradicts me, I agree with them. And then once I establish that agreement between us, then I can offer another point of view.
And how does that work? Oh yeah, continue, sorry.
And sometimes people are very negative and there's not much you can do with one encounter. But very often I find that agreeing with them and creating some kind of common ground makes me more of an ally than an enemy. And then they can hear what my viewpoint is.
So now, do you openly tell them I agree, or it's even just a conscious in your mind?
I say I agree.
I'm wondering, even if you don't necessarily have to verbalize it, but just in your mind, your energy is going to be more coming across as agreeing, that they would be more receptive. Because you're right. I think it's like from these stories, it's important to communicate the positives, but even I think just reframing it in our minds to truly agree. It will be able to communicate, and people, like you were saying, will be able to agree more with your frame of mind as well.
Very often I'll say to them, I agree. I can see how you can say that. Uh-huh. And then offer my opinion.
Nice.
Yeah, that's different than agreeing. So I think, Barbara, I think that's spot on, because when you're angry, when I'm angry, when I'm upset about something, and then somebody's all Pollyanna about it, I feel like they're denying my concern, which is really real. So it feels like an injustice. But if they say something like that, Barbara, like, yeah, I can see how that would happen because that's really an unpleasant situation. I'm thinking I can also see something positive in that and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, so acknowledge the negative first. Otherwise, it feels like you're throwing something in someone's face.
Nice. And also, I'd like to add also one point to that. Thank you, Jolie. Is also trying to like go deeper beneath the surface. Like what, like besides for the outer thing of what could be an area of disagreement, probing deeper and trying to get to a spiritual point of connection and a potential hiding within a place maybe of empathy or a place of that common ground that's not really just about what we are agreeing or disagreeing, but a deeper place that's beyond the opinions that we can agree on, and work from a deeper, beneath the surface layer, and getting that, probing deeper, and you know, just back to that story from Levi Freyden, from that photographer. Like, here's someone who was not neutral to the Rebbe. He was disagreeing with the Rebbe. He thought it was from the Middle Ages. And the Rebbe is putting a positive spin on him, that he was a person of fortitude, that he could stand strong on his opinion, even when everyone else is saying otherwise. And the Middle Ages was pretty light. The Rebbe was able to put a spin to the Middle Ages and also spin on this person. And I think just having that perspective in different places of life, it's a workout. It's hard, I could tell you, and I'm sure you all, many of you can agree, like we were saying before. But it's such a liberating place to be in when you have a positive view. It's first of all, a lot of people want to be around that. It's a great energy to be around, I have to tell you. And for the person that put that comment in, on the contrary, I think the more you're around them in a positive view, the more positive energy they feed off, and will reciprocate, not only on an outer layer, but I think it could reframe other people. It will change the way they think also, when you express and when you feel a certain positive place. I'll just, if anyone has anything else to share before we continue, before we conclude, thank you. That can apply to one of my friendships. That's like my situation. I found, I'll just read Gail's. I found teens that annoyed me when they were young. Teens annoy you? How could that be? Have turned into lovely adults. That's beautiful. So I changed my attitude. Now I usually don't even notice their behavior one way or another. So Gail, I'm sure that takes work to have that, to take that teen that may be very self-absorbing or obnoxious and whatever, and to actually see a beautiful energy, a youthful energy, to see the positive. A lot of times, by the way, it's a beautiful thing. I have kids, teenagers that come for volunteer work, and they don't do the work well. Not all of them. Some of them do a great job, but some of them are trying to be on their phone and whatever. And it could be annoying because I need a work done. We need to get a mailing out or whatever is going on. And sometimes it's a workout. It's incredible. This kid is 16 years old and he wants to spend time with a rabbi. It's pretty good. How many 16-year-olds want to do that, right? So it's just a small layer of positive spin, but it changed, by the way, whenever I do that. Not whenever, but often, it changes the whole energy of our relationship. When we're sitting across the table doing a mailing or whatever it is, it's more engaging. Instead of me feeling, again, he wants to go on his phone or she wants to whatever, and instead all of a sudden it's engaging, because it's not even I say anything. It's just a positive feeling that goes through me, and I think is so easily communicated. We all know when a negative energy enters a room, you feel it. So the positive is the same. And it just, people feed off of that. It's such an incredible thing. So it's that powerful change of perspective and a positive bias that, again, it's a workout, but it's an amazing thing. All right, we'll end the class here. I think we went overtime again. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll continue next week. Another update of something really cool. There's an amazing book that Adina and I read from a Holocaust survivor. You'll be the first people to hear this. It's called The Chosen. It's a Holocaust survivor. Her name is Dr. Eva Edith Eger, I think. I don't know Edith or Ava, which one's first. She's 92 years old, a psychologist that had you can't imagine what she went through in the war. Some of you, I think, read this story, read her book called The Chosen. I recommend it. So God willing, on August 6th, it's on a Thursday evening. Earlier in the evening, I think around 6 is the latest she can go. And we'll have her address our community through Zoom. She's it's not just her story, her way of thinking. her psychology is incredible. Read one chapter of her book and you'll have a
The
different
Choice. It's called The Choice.
The Choice. Yes, thank you.
Not The Chosen.
What did I say? Did I say The Chosen?
The Chosen.
All right.
Chaim Potek.
Right.
Yeah.
The Choice.
I get it.
I think I heard her at a book festival. She was fantastic.
How many years ago would that have been, Isabel?
Oh, just a couple.
Okay, because I've been trying to get her for a while. She lives in San Diego, actually, in La Jolla.
Oh.
And she's very close to Chabad. But in the past year or two, she doesn't travel. So at least, and I've never thought of doing a Zoom thing before a few months ago.
Yeah.
At least through Zoom.
Maybe it was 3 or 4. And at the end of her talk, she kicked up her leg to show us she could.
Wow. So she danced for Dr. Mengele in the camps. She was found among dead bodies by an American soldier and brought back to life. Like her hand was moving. And she came, I was actually just talking with Adina today. She came from nothing, from zero, to being a very successful psychologist. She's writing another book called The Gift. And that, she said, is coming out in August, the end of August. Anyway, August 6th, which is on a Thursday evening. It's around 2 weeks away. We're hoping to have her. Still confirming some details, but hopefully we'll make it work. So circle that date for now. Tomorrow, Adina has her last Torah and tea in the series. She's feeling great, thank God. And tomorrow night, for those that are part of our advanced Hebrew, that'll be at 7 p.m. This coming Sunday, we have the second in our series. Margie, I hope you got my email from the recording of Nigeria. I know you were asking for it. It's really cool. We interviewed the rabbi of Nigeria on Sunday, yesterday, and it was fascinating what they do there and with the broader community, just life in Nigeria, Jewish life in Nigeria was really, really awesome. So we'll be doing this coming Sunday on a small city called Sumy, Ukraine, which is on the border with Russia. It was like the headquarters of communism. And it's incredible what's going on there in terms of Jewish life, where they came from before he arrived to town, I think around 15 years ago, where he is now. So that'll be Sunday. I have to confirm with him. I think he needs a little later. It'll be 12 p.m. our time, which is 9 p.m. for him, I think. But I'll send out an email tomorrow, God willing, to confirm all the details and the link. And that'll be on Sunday. Thank you all again. Have a positive week. Shavua Tov. And we'll see you all soon.